Rabbi Yaakov Menken, thank you so much for joining us. Good to have you on the show.
Glad to be back with you.
Rabbi, in response to the surprise attack by Hamas, world leaders, including two members of Congress, are calling on Israel to have restraint in their response. What impact is that kind of rhetoric having on U.S.-based Jews?
Well, I think that we have to begin with, when they say it, they act like they're saying a neutral diplomatic thing, that both sides should exercise restraint. Of course, they only do this after the catastrophic terror atrocity, whatever that might be, which in this case amounts to the largest massacre of Jews since the Nazi Holocaust. That's what just transpired in Israel. So when they call for restraint now, they're basically saying that Israel shouldn't do everything it can do to neutralize the Hamas terror organization, to just punish them a little bit and then allow them to regroup, rearm, and find new ways to do new atrocities the next time. Restraint is exactly the wrong answer. Restraint is how you lose wars. Nobody called for restraint with Ukraine. Nobody called for restraint when the United States and the British were bombing Dresden into ruins on their way to defeating the Nazis. And actually, restraint was called fatal restraint. It was pilloried in a documentary about the Vietnam War as how the United States lost the war, because the president at the time, Lyndon Johnson, insisted on a policy of restraint. Restraint, you lose wars. They want Israel to lose. And obviously, that has an impact on American Jews and on Jews in Israel and on the safety of that entire region. Basically, what the world is doing is creating a hostile climate for Jews. And we see that playing out in America when you've got demonstrations in the street, and even from a group of Harvard University students making declarations in support of the Hamas terror organization.
And Rabbi, you mentioned that restraint is not the correct answer. And to your point, Hamas is designated a terrorist organization by the U.S. and UN. What is the correct answer here? What is the correct response?
I think at this point it's abundantly clear that Hamas, it has genocide in its charter. It cannot coexist beside Israel. This has proven it beyond measure. This is what just happened is Israel's 9/11. Though when you consider that it is a country of only 9 million people as compared to the 330 million people in the United States, it's as if 40,000 Americans had died. I mean, that is the proportion of the tragedy, that literally almost everyone in Israel knows somebody who was murdered just a few days ago. And as a result of that, you don't have a society anymore that is willing to put up with this delusional pipe dream of living side by side with Hamas, the terror organization, and its Palestinian Authority cheering section.
And Rabbi, you did bring up the Harvard. So there are 31 Harvard organizations who are blaming Israel for the Hamas attack. They're saying that Israel has, quote, forced Palestinians to live in an open-air prison for over 2 decades. Give us a sense of what's at the root here. Why are we seeing this attack unfold now?
Well, of course, that narrative has been developing over time. But it is simply moronic. It's imbecilic. These people have never learned anything about Middle Eastern history or are deliberately lying about it. Because what actually happened is that Israel in 2006 deliberately disengaged from Gaza, uprooted thousands of Jews from their homes, pulled out of that territory, said, here, we're going to give the Palestinian Arabs a section to call their own where they can develop a nice civil society. In fact, they left behind things like greenhouses that the Jews had painstakingly developed and left them behind for the Arabs, who promptly destroyed them. The territory was very shortly thereafter taken over by Hamas. In fact, Hamas was elected to lead them. This was democratically. The people of Gaza chose Hamas, the genocidal terror organization, to lead them. So that just sends a message of its own, obviously. But the idea that this was an open-air prison, first of all, that never happened. There are luxury hotels in Gaza. There are markets filled with food. There's all kinds of opportunities for people in Gaza. But second of all, it's not Israel that's controlling all the borders. Egypt has a border with Gaza as well. They only demonize Israel for doing what Egypt does as well, because only if they enter Israel will they find Jews to kill. It reminds us that half the architects of Hitler's final solution had PhDs, were academics. There is nothing wrong with saying a person has a high academic education and is a genocidal barbarian. And each and one of these Harvard student organizations just demonstrated that to be true, because the entire narrative they presented was inexcusable, anti-Semitic, drawn from the Nazi era, blames Jews for the fact that Jews are being killed. It's all the classic hate narrative that Jews have heard for thousands of years.
And Rabbi, given all of that, the U.S. has also confirmed that at least 9 Americans were killed. The U.S. is now deploying an aircraft carrier to the region. What must the U.S. do now to help Israel?
Well, I think that the carrier is simply there as a show of alliance and force. It is saying to other allies in the region, don't get involved. There's already been an incursion from Lebanon, but the Lebanese really can't afford to get involved with Israel right now. This has to remain between Israel and Hamas. The largest mobilization that Israel's ever done of its reservists in its history just happened this week. There is nobody really that wants to tussle with the Israelis right now, but the Americans being there saying, don't get us involved. We don't want you to be involved. Well, that's a very important thing. The other thing is that the Americans need to stay the course. It's great to ally with Israel when the Israelis are the victims. But what about when Israel becomes the victors? Israel is about to enter Gaza. There's going to be a ground war. And because it's going to be a ground war, lots of innocent people are going to die. That's what happens in ground war conflicts. This is something that Hamas brought upon itself. This is something that Gazans brought upon themselves by electing Hamas to lead them, and then doing nothing to stop them as they launched one terror attack after another against Israel leading up until this day.
Rabbi Yaakov Menken, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.